The three terms that you also mentioned at the beginning of the book and in the intro and the first chapter, you talk about house slaves, housekeepers, and housemakers, and how so often Black women are restricted from accessing the role as housemaker or
Homemaker,
homemaker.
yeah.
And so, as given that we're talking about success, I'm fascinated that you connect um, the goal and the work of homemaker to success. Can you talk to us a little bit about those three areas? What are their differences? Why are they different? And then, talk to us about how you connect that to success.
Thank you. Oh, that's so good. Thank you for that. You know, the reason I focus on Black women, right, is because if I'm trying to trace what I call not only practices of making oneself at home, but another way to think about it is strategies of perseverance. How do you persist as you're being countered at every turn? And Black women give us real access to those strategies of perseverance because they are being countered at every turn by the violence of racism and the violence of sexism, right? As Kimberly Crenshaw would say, they live at that intersection where those two come together. So if I'm going to try to figure out how do we continue as a community to pursue success despite the violence that we encounter, then looking at Black women will be a really important way for understanding that. And the reason why house slaves, housekeepers, homemakers became such an important lens for me to look at is because, within slavery, this idea of being enslaved labor, right? Supporting the homemaking of white people. Your own home doesn't matter. We're going to split you from your children. We're going to split you from your partner, but you're going to support the homemaking of white people. So it's okay with me if you're a house slave, just don't think you're going to be a homemaker. Once we get out of slavery and, Black women are relegated often to domestic service. So even though we're emancipated and supposed to have some larger opportunity, it is very clear in the early decades of emancipation and even into the 30s and 40s and 50s that domestic labor is the main way that you can actually support yourself and your family. Now, at least you're able to, live in your own house. But I mean, Toni Morrison and others have kind of highlighted the way that even in those later decades, supporting white people's homemaking is what's most important. So we're okay with you being housekeepers, just don't think that you're a homemaker. But part of what I was so fascinated by was the way that even as Black women were countered in all these ways and being kept from supporting their own homemaking and making that the biggest priority, even though they were trying to keep us from doing that every step of the way, Black women were actually homemakers even in the worst circumstances. So even in slavery, I'm tracing the ways that the homemaker in Harriet Jacobs or in Elizabeth Keckley, even their homemaking, it doesn't necessarily look like the traditional sign that white people say they're going to respect, but they managed to make homes even in those horrible circumstances. So one of the things I highlight, for example, is the way that Elizabeth Keckley talks about how she is supporting her mother when they live in the same white people's house for a while. The main thing that drives Elizabeth Keckley is how can I support my mom as she is having to labor under these horrible circumstances? So part of what I was interested in doing by putting those three terms together, as you just laid out so beautifully, is that I wanted us to recognize that even when they weren't recognized as homemakers, they were homemakers. And so to my mind, part of why, what you're highlighting is so important is that, again, it's about, do we have the tools to recognize what they're doing against the worst odds? Even when others wouldn't recognize it as them being homemakers, they recognize that they're homemakers. And if we read carefully, we can see how they're homemakers, even when it doesn't look traditional. So part of what I'm invested in, right, is that the book very often focuses on the heteronormative Black family, that Black families are attacked when they follow that model of, you know, a breadwinner husband with a financially dependent wife and children. When Black people can achieve that, which is what the nation says it most respects, when they achieve that, they are attacked viciously. But part of what that, you know, that trio of house slave, housekeeper, homemaker allows us to recognize is that even as they trace the heteronormative nuclear family being under attack, they also help us understand that they know that their successes will be attacked no matter what form it comes in. So even as this book traces the heteronormative nuclear family as a site of intense violence from white folk and white supremacy, at the same time that it does that, it highlights for us the value of alternative domesticities and queer intimacies too, because these are people who understand that no matter what their homemaking looks like, they will be attacked.